Hi, everybody. It's Susan here, and I'm just going to touch on the astrological new year. Happy astrological new year. Most people don't pay too much attention to this, except that it is, of course, the Aries Equinox, or the point of more or less equal day and night if you're near the equator. This is interesting, and it's why, for example, Aries is the exaltation point for the sun, because the sun is moving north over the equator, above the equator, towards the Tropic of Cancer, where it turns around, or appears to. The movement of the sunlight starts to descend southbound from the Tropic of Cancer back to the equator, and then goes south after the 21st of June-ish, 20th, 21st of June, depending, towards the then Tropic of Capricorn. So it's, sorry, I missed one step in there. So it goes to the equator at the equinox in Libra, and then it goes, which is the autumn in the north and the spring in the south, in the southern hemisphere, and then it continues its southbound journey to the Tropic of Capricorn at the winter solstice, or the Capricorn solstice, around 20th of December. So so this is what is used by tropical astrologers to begin the zodiac, the zero Aries point. And indeed, about 1800, no, yeah, 1800, or even up, well, certainly 2000 years ago, and I think as early as 1700 years ago, the the zodiac, or what we consider to be the zero Aries point, also lined up with the constellation of Aries at the time. And so that's why there is, I think, a growing in confusion around what is the appropriate way to conduct astrology. But there was never any doubt that the zero Aries point is a reflection of the movement of the sun and has nothing to do with the constellations. It was a coincidence at that time. And some traditions, including the Indian one, which is based essentially on the sidereal zodiac mostly, meaning the stars, still attaches the stars, or gives preeminence to the stars, rather than the movement of the sun. Although they will use tropical zodiac to create the what is known as the ayanamsha, which creates the difference between the tropical zodiac and the degree points of the beginning of the sidereal zodiac, which is currently around 24 degrees of difference. This is why there's this big debate about which zodiac is correct. But the whole purpose of this movement of the sun to ground us to our own star, the sun being our star, is to track the movements of the sunlight as we can actually see it out the window. And so we do that year by year by attaching the zero Aries point to this point of the spring, or the vernal equinox. And that can be called the Aries Equinox, just to not annoy the people in the Southern Hemisphere. And we haven't forgotten you. But that explains also why you get the growing long nights and cold weather in the Southern Hemisphere. And that's because the sun is moving farther and farther north, above the equator, and farther, therefore, away from the Southern Hemisphere. And the opposite is true for us in the north, as of the equinox in September. Right, so enough for that little bit of little nitty-gritty thing. And by the way, this is the solar new year. And in India, for example, for those of you who are interested in Indian astrology and culture, they would put more emphasis on the lunar new year, and that happens to be the 8th of April. So again, different strokes for different folks. They're all valid and perfectly legitimate. Stick to what you like and leave everybody else alone. So let's go. I'm going to show you two different ways of reading the chart, and then we're going to have a look at a bunch of different countries and the leaders of those countries who are particularly strongly in the news. Now, I can't do them all it's a lot. It's always difficult to do these things alone because there's just so many details to keep including, and then I'm just going to throw my thoughts out there. So I would love to hear from you in the comments. I'm still hoping to find somebody who is equally interested in astrology and good at astrological references as they are in politics. I'm often able to find one, but not the other. So if you are one of those people who is very good at geopolitics and astrology, I would so much love to hear from you, because I think this is worthy of a team effort and a conversation. And also, I'm not able to do certain, countries or regions, partly for time constraints, but also because I just don't have enough information myself, and I hold myself to a relatively high standard, and I don't want to just kind of throw ideas out there without any background. So that's why you, for example, won't be hearing about Australia, even though I know so many of you from Australia here. So I apologize in advance, but I will, if any of you knows, as I just asked about astrology and geopolitics from Australia, I'd be very happy to talk to you. Right, so I'm going to show you two different ways of looking at the chart in a general way. And then we're going to have a look at these different countries. And for the sign by sign, I'm not going to do that, because if you listen to both the eclipses, so the 25th of March eclipse and the 8th of April eclipse, you'll get roughly the same information. So it's really pointless to just point out, a small marginal difference. As we are only several days out, 5 days out from this eclipse, and as I'm doing this, it's a week away. So and by the way, as I'm doing this, it's the 18th of March. If you're watching on the 18th of March, hello. And otherwise, in the future, if you're looking back, this was when Mercury started its shadow phase. So we've got Mercury now at that 17-degree point where, sorry, I think it's 16 today, where it's actually going back into its shadow phase. So we're going to see Mercury going from the 1st of April through the 25th of April retrograde from the 27th degree of Aries, and then all the way back to the degree that it's at now at this Aries equinox. So this is important. So keep that in mind, because basically if you keep track of what's been going on from this point on, and all the way till the 25th of April, you'll have a great reference in terms of what it is that you're going over in your life. So especially look for those different degrees in your natal chart, or in opposition or square particularly, and see how that might be affecting you as well. Because that will be a focus. That'll be a focus on something important in your personal experience or in your life in general. Let's see if I have little notes for myself. I have my this is my do little sticky notes. That's how I do. That's how this Mars and this stellium and Mercury Mars in Pisces rolls. So speaking of Pisces, we do at the time of this eclipse have a Venus and Saturn conjunction, which everybody's getting very excited about. I'm a little more positive or bullish on this. Perhaps that's naive, but I will show you why, and see if that pans out. Only time will tell. But I don't see it as a negative thing. I see this as something that can be extremely constructive. Now, one last little thing to see if I've got any bits that I wanted to share with you before we jump in. And I think we're good. Yeah, so we've got the exalted sun in Aries. It's a cardinal sign. And I'm just beginning with the universal time chart. And so that puts an ascendant in Capricorn. And so this is actually happening universal time on the 20th of March. And for most of the world, it will be the 20th of March. And for North and South America, it will be the 19th of March. So this is at 3 in the morning, overnight, and then it would be, of course, late evening on the East Coast and in the afternoon on the West Coast of the States. for example. But it's not really such a big deal. It's more, unless you want to time something to this, it's more for the effect of what is promised, let's say, in terms of this astrological new year. So we think of it as, you could think of it as a birthday, a solar birthday, the sun's very own solar return. And all that this is doing is, it was one old medieval way of, our ancient traditional way of seeing what the year ahead could look like. And it's a very, very good timing device for certainly the quarters, for the seasons. So really good if you take each of the cardinal signs and the ingress of the sun into the cardinal sign, and you take it like that, and you can see how each season is going to pan out. And that's particularly how they used to do things like gauge the weather and farming and issues like that. Now, that you have to do for your local space. There's no point in doing that in universal time if you want to see the farming conditions in, say, California. So you have to do that in your local space and see what that looks like, because the houses will be different. Let's see. I wanted to show you this version. The reason we're starting out with this London Greenwich Mean Time version is that I found it extremely telling of the basic themes, or the major themes that I see emerging over the course of this year. And then we'll have a look at the solar chart, and you can see how that looks different. So we have an ascendant in Capricorn and a descendant in Cancer. And so we can see that the overall theme there is this issue of rulership versus what is necessary or needed for the well-being of people. Now, you can extrapolate this into your own life, absolutely. So you can take this on board in your own experience. And I'm going to just give you some generalities that you can think of in terms of yourself and your own experience of life, and then, of course, expand that into society and the world at large. The ruler of this ascendant is in a sextile to the ascendant, and that's always very helpful, very favorable. And the ruler is in the third house, which has a lot to do with communications, organization of communities, neighbors, neighborhoods, all kinds of exchanges, commercial exchanges, financial exchanges, and education. What else is the third house? Siblings, extended family. And so this is, I think, a really big issue. Obviously, it is, generally speaking, but especially this year. And so the fact that it is in a sextile to the ascendant is already quite helpful. And that we're also boosted because Jupiter is also in a trine to the ascendant, and it's also in a sextile to that ruler of the ascendant. So this is really very helpful. I find relating back to the ascendant extremely important, whether it's a natal chart or an event chart like this one. So here, what we have also is that Venus is alongside Saturn at this time, and Venus alongside the ruler of the ascendant is quite benefic. It's very helpful. She's uplifting and otherwise grumpy, kind of serious energy. But it can also show in general, because the third house is also kind of the house of friends. It's like your casual friends. It's like your coffee pals. But also just the way that you communicate and the way that you express things. And so when Venus and Saturn come along, there's a reconsideration around those things. It's a time to kind of get serious about things. And interestingly, Venus in Pisces is very much connected to a feeling of wanting to support the underdog. So Pisces in general is like that. Soon, during the eclipse season, Mars will be in Pisces, and that continues that theme even more powerfully, that feeling of wanting to look after the weaker parties of society. And this is something that I think is also particularly strong in our culture right now, and in our frame of reference. In our own lives, it would be to, beef up the areas of life where we really need to improve, perhaps our connection to family, or our connection to the people in our neighborhood and people that are around us. The third house is like local space. So whether this is about a cooling off and a kind of a reconsideration of relationships overall, which I think we can also see, generally speaking, or is this about a more serious approach to relationships and something that can become long lasting? That will be up to you in your own individual life, and then we will see that playing out on the world stage. So keep in mind, this is like the year ahead, if you like, forecast. And so this is, I think, the trend that we're going to see between now and next spring. It's definitely a clarifying time and the time of getting serious around leaders as well. So if we take the sun, the exalted sun in Aries, which is the star of the show, it's also in a trine to the moon in Leo, which is quite supportive. Except if we take the house system here that we're looking at an 8th house moon, which can represent the public. It represents the attitude of the people. And that's in opposition to Pluto, which is in the house of power and money. And this is creating some kind of tension. And this we will see, I think, throughout the year in a really powerful way. This trine to the sun, which represents leaders of all kinds and the governments, you could say, is helpful up to a point, except that there is a feeling of not being happy. So the moon is never comfortable in the 8th house. It's a challenging place. It's a place where there are realizations of motives or darker insinuations or secrets or incidents that are shocking and sudden and difficult to manage. Leo is the sign of leaders as well, and so the moon has also taken on some of the meaning of the sun itself. And I see this as foreboding a kind of ill for many leaders around the world. So moon opposite Pluto, the second house is our values are collectively and individually, and also issues around money. And the 8th house is shared wealth, shared resources. So there's something here where there's a disgruntlement that is going to, I think, expand throughout the year. So this whole year ahead, this will be very important. This pushback, let's say, between the general public and the powers that be. Pluto itself, of course, is in a sextile to the sun, and that's very supportive to leadership in general, or to ourself, let's say, as an individual. If we take this as an individual, we're looking at our emotional nature and understanding our deeper motives, our deeper emotional nature, and perhaps going through some really difficult time, trying to figure out how this year could feel better for us. There is a lot, whether it's personal or collective, there's a lot of focus on what we need to feel secure this year. This is a major part of our collective identity. And the 4th house, if we think of this from a mundane perspective or the worldly perspective, it represents our nationhood and our sense of where we come from and what is our roots, our people, let's say. So that's quite significant. It's going to be something that is increasingly in focus. I think, especially with Pluto moving into the house of values and money and issues around money, where Mars is currently, which is ruling this 4th house, putting a lot of pressure on finances and money in general. Mars is also in a square. So it's a broad square, but it's still applying in a square to Uranus, or separating square to Uranus. So lots of chaos and confusion around money to be expected as well. But that Mars ruling the sun in the same house as Pluto, which also represents our values, our changing values, sextiling the sun. It suggests also a change in terms of our vision for our countries, our vision for our people, our vision for ourselves collectively or ourself as an individual. And it can be an empowerment in all of that, and a need, in this case, to change the leadership. And this we're finding all around the world. We had just now Russian elections over the weekend. Leadership did not change. I will show you Russia and Putin's not well-timed chart, but still we'll just get a vision of what's coming up for that country and that leader. And so also think in terms of your own experience of what you need to be happy, what you need to feel secure, how you need that to look also emotionally and psychologically, which is a callback again to that moon in the 8th with the sun in the 4th. At the same time, we have this Mercury, remembering it's just entering into its shadow, so it's going to be important at this degree, coming back through after the 25th of April. And it's conjunct Chiron, and that is something that's been going on now for a few days, and this you could say this whole week, let's say. And this Mercury Chiron is where we really do need to reflect on how we are communicating. That's another part of this third house emphasis with the Venus and Saturn, I think. And the Mercury Chiron suggests that we do need to reflect on how we're communicating with each other, or how we're communicating about the bigger issues of what we are feeling vulnerable around. That's that Chiron again. And it can also be where we can just recognize with the Mercury North Node that we need a new way of communicating. And it's not just in terms of our politics and in terms of our, the sort of diplomatic way of communicating, but it's amongst ourselves. And as an individual, are you communicating in a way that is constructive? Now, Mercury in Aries is quite sharp. It can be quite impulsive and not really thinking about the effects or the consequences of the speech, or the way that it's coming out, or the nature. It can be funny as well, quite snappy and witty and so on. But Mercury in Aries can have that sort of foot in mouth disease that Mercury in fire signs tends to have, and just saying things that are that can cause more harm than good. So we might see this in terms of our collective, where there's some sort of big mouths or flashpoints in terms of communication, which are just simply not helpful. And so at the very least, we as individuals should try as much as possible to cool that language down, speak kindly, and become aware of how we speak. Listen as much as you speak. It's an important part of communication. The listening part is also part of the communication, and also with that Mercury Chiron, we can think in terms of siblings, and then we come back to that third house, the ruler of the chart with Saturn there in the third house, around extended family and siblings and so on. And so we can look at where we are hurting within families or extended family groups, and of course being all one large human family as well, part of the same home, planet Earth. And so this is something to reflect on. It's definitely going to be a big feature throughout the year. And so our need to communicate in a new way is extremely important. Now, what I find is really helpful here is that engagement with Jupiter in a sextile to Venus, and in a mutual reception with Venus, which is lovely. So mutual reception means that one planet is in the other planet's sign, and these are two benefics. And Venus particularly is exalted in Pisces, and so this brings about an absolutely brilliant opportunity for something to move forward in a very positive direction. Now, I have to say, this will not necessarily, especially we're talking about collectively now. So for some people, positive direction means that you always get your way. And so we have to look at this in terms of a larger picture, Positive direction means that things are moving in a more constructive way for the benefit of most people or the greater good. And whether you live in that country or not, we have to look at this from a bigger picture. Now, of course, it'll depend on your country. You would want to pay attention to the way that this is affecting your nation, and then, of course, in your own individual chart. But I do see it overall as something constructive and helpful. That Pluto in a sextile to the sun, transforming leadership, I think is it's going to happen come hell or high water, in a way that is more in alignment with something that the people are pushing for, because there is anger in the air. And that anger we see here with that Mars. Mars is always going to be the ruler of this Aries equinox. It's just part of the deal. But so we look for where Mars is. It's in the house of values and money and what supports people. And Mars is in Aquarius, and so it's a sense of the masses, the anger of the masses, or the anger of the hoi polloi, the people. Aquarius is that the hoi polloi, the collective, and they're not happy. And so there will be change, and that change is coming in a way that is necessary. And I think with that Pluto in a sextile to the sun, it's constructive change. Again, not necessarily comfortable and or desirable to each and in every individual, but it's something that that is necessary over the long haul. Right, I want to show you another way to see this chart. And so if we take it now to we're going to put it on the Aries ingress now. And so, sorry, I don't want this. That's not what I want. I have to edit the chart. I did it the wrong way. So I want the 0 Aries. There we go. And we're going to take away, hang on just a second. We're going to take away these references. And so we don't see any of the, oh, it's not changing for me. Let's ignore the ascendant, descendant, and so on. We're just going to ignore all that stuff, okay? So what I want to show you is that now we put it on the 0 Aries, and now we're reading as a solar chart. So this is what I would do, for example, when I don't know somebody's birth data. I take a solar chart. I put the sun in the first house. In this case, it's at 0 Aries. So it's not only in the first house, but it's at the very beginning of the first house. And then we read the houses in this, what is called the derived house system. And so here what we have is the first house sun, where we find Jupiter in the second house, which is very, very good. The ruler of the first house is in the 11th house, which is another money house. The second house is a money house. It's about income and money. And the ruler of the chart is also in a money house. Now, this can go both ways because the ruler in the 11th house is ruled itself by Saturn in the 12th, which is the house of loss. It's a house of letting go. It's a house of things that are not necessarily working out as we want them to, or they're working out in ways that are not going to pan out until later, and that we're preparing things behind the scenes. So we can see this in that way, that there will be a lot about money, but not necessarily in the easiest way, especially because Jupiter in the second house not just reflects money coming in, but also money going out. And especially as Uranus is there, there's a lot of chaos around money, and that is evident already, but it'll continue that way the whole year through. So this Jupiter, although it is helpful that Jupiter is ruling that Saturn, it's ruling the Venus, which is in the 12th, but it is still not in good dignity, and in the housing sense. So the 12th house tends to create some kind of havoc in terms of the money situation. Things can also be secretive, things that are not really clear, and so things to do with money or things to do with public issues or things to do with the collective, which is what the ruler of the ascendant is telling us is important. The collective is changing. The situation around society, Pluto going into the 11th, situation around society is changing. And another way that this can show up very powerfully is that there is a new vision for the future. And that is not necessarily going to be a calm one, because the ruler of the chart is Mars. And it's ruled by another malefic, Saturn, which is in the 12th house, which is the house of letting go and change and self-undoing. So this is one way of looking at the chart. I just wanted to point this out. There are different ways of reading the chart, both of them valid, both of them telling some really interesting details, let's say, about the year ahead. And we also have, in this case, the Sun and Moon trine from the 1st to the 5th. Trine is always very helpful. It's got the quality of Jupiter, so always beneficial. And in this case, the Moon is in the 5th house of good fortune, good luck, with this opposition to Pluto in the 11th house of gains and so on. But I'm not so sure that we're going to see that good luck that we're hoping for. I think that that it can be something extremely challenging, given that Mars is there in the Saturn ruled sign in the 11th house. So what else would I want to say about this? So the North Node, of course, with Mercury in the 1st house and Chiron there in the 1st house, does again suggest that there's something that we need to work on for ourselves. Now, this is interesting because this moon, the moon is a trine, astrologically speaking, but that if we look in the sky, that's considered to be a waxing gibbous moon. So it's on its way to being a full moon. It's after the 1st quarter, and then it becomes a full moon when the moon hits Libra. And so and of course that would that's the eclipse that we're all expecting on the 25th. So a waxing gibbous moon is very interesting on a personal level, for sure, collectively perhaps as well. But it brings a lot of opportunity for introspection and deep understanding. So if you're born with a waxing gibbous moon, you would tend to be somebody who's quite deep and introspective, and also with a capacity to stand alone. And individuation is strong with people in this moon phase. And so that waxing gibbous phase brings a certain element of wisdom. It's kind of, again, it rhymes with that Jupiterian quality of the trine. And so that's quite positive, I think. In traditional astrology or Hellenistic astrology, Venus would be considered to be hemmed in or under besiegement, or besieged is another way it's called. It's pretty dramatic sounding. I'm not super convinced by this, and even still, because Mars is not in the same sign, and it's quite far away from Venus, and Saturn is the one big issue for Venus here, but that's something she can handle quite well because she's in great dignity there. But the good thing here, so I'm just looking in terms of the things that are more sticking points, but for me, the besiegement, if there is any, and I'm not entirely convinced that we can call it a besiegement, but okay. If there were any besiegement, it would be canceled out because of this, what is called an interception. This is a little techie, but the interception of that Jupiter, the benefic, which is ruling Venus and sextiling Saturn, which is part of the besiegement. So, and Saturn is ruling that Mars. So there are the couple of sticking points that there are not. I'm not suggesting this is going to be easy. The Pluto opposite the Moon tells us right off the bat that it won't be. But I do think that there are ways through this. And if we're looking at who's intervening here in terms of any potential besiegement of Venus, meaning that she's in danger from the malefics, then we're looking at wisdom, and we're looking at abundance, and we're looking at this capacity to overcome. And that's another meaning of the sun trining the moon, or the moon trining the sun, more correctly. And so we want to look at these ways of finding support, like like Mr. Rogers used to say, look for the helpers. Look for the helpers. We're here, the helpers. Yes, we've got the moon trining the sun. We've got Jupiter supporting by sextile this Saturn and Venus. And Saturn and Venus are all week long building up to the eclipse. They are conjoined, and it's exact on the 22nd. I think is it 22nd Friday? Yeah, so the 22nd of March, it is exact. But again, it's already well in orb. And it's not bad. It's something that can be very helpful because you do want clarity. Our modern culture doesn't respond well to Saturn. We want everything fun and light and easy and in excess and without responsibility, and we want to be the CEO upon graduation and all these things. It's that life doesn't work that way. Certain things require effort, and we don't acquire a certain amount of appreciation for things, including the beauty of life, the value of life, the nice things of life that Venus represents, especially in Pisces. We don't get that appreciation until we've worked for it. There's a lovely thing Frank Clifford, a fantastic astrologer, Frank Clifford, would say about Saturn, and that is that with Saturn, you don't always get what you work for, but you work for everything that you get. And I think that's probably the best way of understanding Saturn. It's that life is not always going to turn up the way that you want it, but certainly it's worth trying. And with Venus and Saturn together, things like relationships, things like beauty and harmony, and working our way through joy and happiness, that's worth the effort. So I'll leave it on that. And then if you're not interested in the mundane stuff, you can leave now. I'll be back with more videos coming up. But if you do like the mundane stuff, then join me, and we'll have a look at how all of this is shaping up in the. Hang on. Oh, look there. We'll start with China. So looks like we'll start with China. So we're going to have a look now at how China is going to fare in the year ahead. It's quite interesting to see how things are lining up. A number of countries are having their nodal returns, and China is one of them. India is another one. I'm not going to look at India today, but India will have their nodal return at like 10, 11 degrees. So that'll be, I guess, late summer, maybe July, August, or something like that. India is also having elections, which are a big deal because it takes a lot to get 1 billion plus people to vote. Anyway, so let's have a look. So this is China. We have the inner ring is, hang on, I want to take away, let me just change the chart here. I want to take away these annotations. And that way we can see better. I want to have, all right, it's not going to change for me. I don't know why that's very annoying. Full moon chart. There we do it like that. There we go. All righty. So we do, however, for the People's Republic of China, we want to see they're displayed mid-heaven. So we want to put them in, and I'm going to give them, there we go, natal chart. Right, there we are. So this is the thing that jumps out. Always when there's something that's jumping out of the chart, we go to that. So we've got the North Node that would have just had their nodal return. So this means that this year is going to be a whole new way of showing up for China. Not only that, but they've got Pluto on the ascendant. And so let's switch this around. It'll be easier to see that Pluto is on the ascendant. And the North Node has just passed by the natal North Node. We have Mercury and on the North Node as well. So this suggests that there's going to be a lot of commerce because it's in the third house for China. A lot of commerce and a lot of business and exchanges of all kinds with their neighbors. The third house for a nation is their neighbors, the people that they connect with locally. So lots and lots going on for them. And so this Pluto on the ascendant is quite impressive because it's nearly exact. It's 5 arc minutes of a degree off the ascendant at the time of this Aries ingress. And so here, this is really important because on top of that, the moon, which is the people of China, the public, is on the descendant in opposition to that Pluto, but exactly also in opposition to the natal moon of China. So we're going to see in 2025, Pluto crossing the moon. It'll just be poking at that in 2024, but it'll be actually conjoining the moon in 2025. So that means that there's going to be really massive change in the public, in the Chinese body politic. And this also suggests that there's something to do with what you might call trade partners or enemies. And so there's a lot here that is highlighted. There's going to be a lot of influence, let's say, from people, rather countries from their influence, from the trade partners' influence. So it's interesting that it's the moon. It's not a malefic, so that's interesting. China has Mars in the first house, from ruling the third house and ruling the 10th house. So they're going to be super dynamic. And by the way, having Mars, it doesn't necessarily show violence. It's not saying that they're going to suddenly like start a war. You have to see that as where they will take action. And you would want to see something lining up exactly, and especially two malefics coming together before you would want to assume there's any kind of war, for example, just to say. So China is going to have a lot of new trade partners. That's that moon showing up, something very new. It's in a trine to the third house, which is trade partners, which is about trade and commerce and so on. So quite a new way of showing up in general. Their south node by transit is crossing over Neptune as well. They've got Neptune on the south node, and that's interesting. That's kind of where you get this ideological way of showing up. You know, this Neptune in the ninth, Neptune south node. It's not entirely coherent. We could say, or there can be an ideological way of idealizing things. I'm going to leave it at that. And so, so that's part of this nodal return that they're in as well. What else is coming up here? And we have Jupiter trining Saturn. That's very, very conducive to something really, it's a separating trine, but still really well within a 2-degree orb, really positive for them. But they do have a Saturn opposition, and it's building to an opposition. So Saturn is building to an opposition. So it's interesting. I should have mentioned in the beginning, but Saturn will be coming back to this point when it retrogrades and then stations direct again. So Saturn is coming back to the 12-degree point of Pisces. When will that be? I think it's like December. So it stations retrograde at 19 degrees at the end of June, beginning of July, and then by late November, early December, it's going to station direct at 12 degrees. So this is very interesting. Saturn will be trining their Venus at the end of June, and it'll come back to, so notice, if you're interested, notice what's going on with China now around this time. late March, early April, because the Saturn opposition is huge. But then there's something that comes up later in the year where there's this flavor of support. Uranus, since last year, has been opposing Venus. So this is in their money houses as well. They're what they have to rely on, the things that they have to rely on, trade and money and so on, is really strong for them. Houses 2 and 3, and then Uranus is opposite Venus, and it's in the fourth house of land and property and the country itself, and again the people. And certainly we know that, and it's also in a trine to Jupiter in the 12th in the house of loss, and they have Jupiter in poor dignity. So we know that China is in a really tough situation now around property. They have kind of a ticking time bomb in terms of fraudulent development and overdevelopment of property, and some of it is just sitting empty. They built up massive cities where literally nobody lives. There's just empty row upon row upon row of buildings, and there is a massive economic struggle. And the other problem is that China bought up quite a lot of the US debt. So China holds some crazy amount of US debt. I wouldn't even know what the number is anymore, because the American debt just has so rapidly increased over the last couple of years as they throw good money after bad in this terrible war with Ukraine. And so I'm trying to think if I know that number, but let's say it's probably about a third of US debt, something like that. Anyway, the point being that United States is broke, and they are certainly not going to be paying back that debt. And so China is trying to bail as quickly as possible and get rid of that debt. And they themselves then are a bit vulnerable. They're a bit exposed also, but also internally there's something very vulnerable about their economy. So this is not going to be an easy year for China, although they will, I think, find solace, let's say, with new trade partners. The newness. So we have this is tricky. The Mercury, which represents commerce and exchanges of all kinds, is in a trine to Pluto, and Chiron is also trining Pluto. I think they're going to have a terrible year financially, and have perhaps quite a lot going on. Now, I could be wrong, and could be that this is the Mercury trining Pluto from the 3rd to the 7th can also, it's a bit tricky, this one. It can also be beneficial, because it can be that there's, again, expansion or some kind of growth or some kind of bigger potential, especially as Pluto is crossing the ascendant. This can be an empowerment. So Pluto going over the ascendant, of course, anyway, it represents change, but this is the image of the country and the power of the country. So Pluto can be very much where they're starting to flex more power. But I don't know about this financial situation, because they have Venus in poor dignity. They have the sun in its fall, like it's just not that straightforward. It's a tricky one. I'd want to speak to somebody who knows more about what's going on there. Jupiter is squaring almost exactly, with 1 arc minute of degree, is squaring Mars. So there could be something that, again, it might involve them in a conflict, or it can be a crisis, a financial crisis, because we are looking at this Venus, which is ruling Uranus, which is opposed by that Uranus, and Mars itself is squaring Jupiter. It's trining the North Node. They could be maybe going through an inflationary cycle. Mars trining the North Node that it rules from the 7th can be that there's some challenge in terms of the economy, again, in terms of can be enemies or it can be trade partners. So seventh house is partners, partnerships. They have challenges in partnerships. This is part of the Chinese situation, which is that they don't have an easy time with partnerships. Not that they don't have a successful time with partnerships, but they have challenges with partners. This could be maybe about India. I would want to put the two charts together, but I don't have time to do that. But anyway, this could be something maybe to do with India because we're looking at neighbors here in the third house. Or this could be about Taiwan or something like that. Again, it depends a little bit how things pan out with the other countries involved, because we're looking at the United States now backing off their big mouthing around China because they've got themselves up to their neck elsewhere in the world. Anyway, let's keep going because otherwise we'll be here all day long. So that was China. So I think China's going to have a very bumpy ride economically. I will go to the US now and let's have a look at what's going on. So this is the US Sibley chart. We have the South Node on the Saturn of the United States, and the US is having its Chiron return. It'll finish up its Chiron return in 2025 because Chiron goes back to 19 of Aries. It will head to 23, then it retrogrades back to 19, and then next year it's gone. So Chiron return for the US along with the Pluto return. So yeah, this is not going to be an easy year for the United States for a number of reasons. So we have the South Node on Saturn. So we see that there's something quite karmic that's happening. And this is in the area of the future, in the sense of what is possible for the future. It's about Congress as well. The 11th house is about government, Congress, Senate, so on. And that's changing quite dramatically this year. The executive would be the 10th house. And we're having, well, that's not an opposition. It's broadly opposite still Neptune. But what's really interesting here is this, is that Mars is very, very tightly conjoined the moon. Again, there's so many signals of real disturbance in the US going forward in 2024. Mars on the moon would be absolutely one of them. It's the local space, it's the community in general, it's transactions and exchanges, it's the marketplaces. The 11th is also referring to marketplaces or exchanges of ideas and beliefs and political notions and so on as well. So that's part of this big change here. Things are shifting in a really big way. But that Mars on the moon is violence and it's real serious upset. And then the people, if we look at the moon itself representing the people, they are seeing the future in a different way. That ninth house represents it's also justice. So the ninth house is legal systems and justice, forms of justice. And there it's the moon on the north node. The people want something different. And this is in opposition to Pluto in the third, where the way that things are shared and communicated, this also, third house again represents for countries, it represents neighboring countries. And so the people are there in opposition to the Pluto, which is coming up on the south node in the third house for the US. And Pluto on the south node is very karmic, just like south node Saturn up there, very karmic stuff in terms of neighboring relationships with the locals, people coming across borders, for example. Which has been a huge issue for a long time. Venus is in a square to Uranus. And that's in the area of the homeland, or the people, the land of the people, let's say, or the property, the actual country. And yeah, and squaring Uranus again with reference to partnerships, foreign partners, commercial partners, or adversaries of some kind. So there's a real tension there. Saturn is also squaring Uranus, and so there's a challenge here in two different ways around the past, or around the way things were. There's something that is shedding the way things have been, or the way things were. And then the Saturn in a square to Uranus is also similar kind of energy of shedding, or there's a tension, let's say, between the way things were and the way things need to be, or have always been done and need to be done, you could say. The nodes here are squaring the US sun. And that's probably aside from the Mars on the moon, that's probably the most significant thing of 2024, at least this, from the Aries ingress point of view, which suggests that there's going to be a massive change in terms of the image of the US, in terms of the way that the US is seen. The sun is how a country is seen. It's also seen in the ascendant, but it's also the leader of the country. Now we see, of course, that it's an election year, so of course there's going to be a new leader. But this is not so straightforward. It's not so easy. Mars on the moon, and Mars ruling the North Node, Chiron returning to Chiron. Yeah, so I think it can be through some serious upheaval or some serious loss. We'll have a look at Joe Biden and Donald Trump, since it looks like it's Biden or Trump, one way or another. I think these it's just insane that we're even talking about the same thing. So we're what else can we find in here? We've got also Uranus, which is in a square to the moon. It's a broad square, but it's still very important. It's square to the Mars and square to the moon. And so there's just this real unsettled energy. And the sixth house is the people, the workers, the labor force, the army, the military is there in the sixth house. And so we're looking at some real tension there as well. And same, if we look at that as a trine there to Pluto, it's the same kind of change. We've got Neptune almost exactly sextiling Pluto this year as well. So there's a lot of confusion as well. There's a lot of frustration and confusion between Pluto in the second, its values, and its the money and resources of the country. The the infrastructure and taxes and the money available to a country, resources of all kinds. The fourth is also resources of all kinds, and there's some big confusion around that, sextiling from the fourth. Yeah, it's hard to read these things. It's just so many different factors. Right. So just to say, I already did this at the beginning of 2024. I did a reading for the US. If you're interested in that, you can see that on my channel. And there I talked about all the different stages of the year and all the different things that will bump into the US chart, because it's going to be affected quite a lot this year. The Chiron return is one painful one, I think, for the people, because it's going to be a lot around the image, people's image, and the people's sense of faith and patriotism, because that's the fifth house. And Chiron is also sextiling Mars, so there's this feeling of, yeah, this kind of not being able to take action in the way that they would have wanted to, or that you would have wanted to, because the Mars currently ruling the Chiron, that's what we want to look at. The Mars currently ruling the Chiron is in a Saturn ruled sign on the moon, and Saturn is there in the fourth house, suggesting that there's some problem or some restriction around resources, around what is available, around the back at the farm, we could say, back at the ranch. There's some problems going on there. And then also the ruler of Mars in the chart is with Chiron. And so there's something that's already not easy, not comfortable there in a sextile to the Mars that is in the seventh, so ruling the seventh with Chiron. So, so a tricky chart for the US. Let's have a look at the leaders here. Start with genocide Joe. Here we go. We have what happened? We need, sorry, I have to revise this chart because it keeps taking away my indicators. I want to see, hang on, I want to display my ascendant, etc. There we go. So here we go, Joe. Right, yeah, so he's got Mars in opposition to Chiron this year. The moon is coming to a conjunction with Pluto, and he's about to have his Pluto opposition, so it's a bit broad, but we could say Pluto opposition as well. What else have we got? There was some, oh yeah, so Saturn is trining his natal Mars. Mars is squaring Venus and Sun here. Yeah, Mars squaring the Sun is not great. We wouldn't want to, that's not an easy way. Like he's got Pluto in a sextile to the ascendant. Pluto is almost exactly trining Neptune, and so maybe there's a change of faith or belief or heart, or maybe again that can be because Neptune in the 11th is about what he considers his future to be. Pluto is in the third house of mind. Yeah, I mean, you would really have to be a cult member to not see that he's seriously in a feeble state of mind. He has Neptune trining the Sun and Venus as well. So there's a couple of indicators here of the mental challenges that he's facing, and then the actual challenges that he's facing with Mars squaring the Sun that it's ruling, and Venus as well that it's ruling. And he has lost support. That's for sure. He's lost the goodwill, any goodwill that he may have accumulated. He has lost. Mars is opposed by Jupiter. So there's a lot of animosity. There's a lot of challenge, and we've got Uranus in a very strong trine to the midheaven. And later in April, that's also going to be where the Uranus and Jupiter conjunction will be trining the midheaven from the 6th. And that can bring about quite a lot of change, because it's also going to be directly opposing Mercury, which is ruling the midheaven. And so I'm not sure that that's going to be positive change for him. The moon is squared by Pluto. I almost forgot that one. Moon is squared by Pluto. So it's a bad year all around for the mind, and also for his relationship, psychologically, emotionally not easy, but also for his relationship from the people, let's say. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to find something that would be described as positive for him, but it's not really an easy year. There's no way around that. So we got, yeah, there's a lot of challenge in this chart. Mars opposing Chiron. It's it's this really, really big challenges here. This is let's say, okay, the moon is trining the ascendant. We'll give them that. The moon is trining the ascendant, the sun is trining the ascendant. So that's nice. That's helpful. That's positive. But I don't think, because Jupiter Uranus, it's trining the midheaven for sure, but because of all of these other obstacles, by the way, 19 degrees again, 19 Pisces is where Saturn will retrograde at the end of June. And that also puts it into a trine with Mercury. And so we're looking at, and here we have Venus and Saturn squaring Saturn. I've overlooked that. So Venus Saturn squaring Saturn as well. So this, keep in mind, this is like kind of a birth of the year chart. So this is the flavor of the year to come in principle. So it's not very easy, but if we extrapolate and go forward, this is where we're looking at. So end of June, beginning of July, Saturn is going to be on the IC opposing the MC. So I'm not sure he's going to make it. I didn't think he'd make it past January, to be honest. But I think what did happen is that he lost his reputation and lost an enormous amount of support from January onwards, already before, but especially rapidly from January onwards. And now I think that it will be quite surprising if he manages to go beyond that summer, sort of June, July timeframe when Saturn is opposing the midheaven. There's some pleasant aspects here, but I'm not so sure that it's going to be enough to get him through. And the other thing is Mars will be stationing. So where the moon is now, Mars will be 3 degrees off that, and it's going to be stationing at 6 degrees of Leo. And that means that Mars is going to be coming back and forth over his Jupiter and Pluto 3 times from the end of this, so starting end of October, so election time, and into December. So Mars will be on his Pluto by December. So there's your answer. No way is Genocide Joe going to win this election. I am not a voter, but honestly, it's the devil's choice, isn't it? It's the devil you know or the devil you don't know. There's no choice this year. I can't think of one country where there's a decent leader anywhere. I'm not sure that they are there. Let's have a look at Donald Trump. Speaking of leaders, have no choice. Right, we have another one, and so a couple of these leaders are really their lives are potentially at risk. I think Donald Trump is one of them. Here we have Mars opposing Mars, and I don't say that lightly. I certainly don't wish it on anyone. It's just to say that there is an actual risk. He's already being threatened by absolutely outrageous, what is known as lawfare. I just have to get my chart back here because it's again losing the bits that I want. So we have seen that the US powers that be have been resorting to Banana Republic techniques of using legal battles against Donald Trump to try and disqualify him from running because he's so popular. And again, I don't say that as somebody who supports him. I'm just saying that as someone who's paying attention. And this is, you do not want that. You do not want your country to dissolve and lose all of its legal credence over these political battles. That is what happens in non-democratic countries. Not to say that the US is a democracy, but anyway. So all this to say, he does have this Mars opposition, very, very strong. Mars on the descendant, that's this is the house of enemies, you know. So he's got Pluto now moving into the house of enemies, Mars there. He's not the only one. There's many other people in the world who have this, and it doesn't mean that just because that you're going to be, you know, gunned down or whatever, but this is a political figure. He's a very important figure, whether you like him or not. And he's also born on an eclipse. And as a result, eclipses really influence his chart. And so he will also be very strongly influenced by the eclipses of March, and especially the one in April. You know, again, because he is an eclipse person. And so he's always going to be very strongly influenced by these eclipses of all kinds. So here we have the Mars in opposition to Mars, Mars opposite the ascendant. Mars is squaring the midheaven. It's not a comfortable chart for the year ahead. He's got Chiron in a trine to the moon. He's got Chiron in a sextile to the sun, sextile to the North Node, sextile to Uranus, and Mercury is sextiling Uranus, which it's ruling exactly within less than half a degree. Chiron is also in a square to Saturn. So these are big challenges. This is a challenging chart for the year ahead. And again, not to say he can't overcome. There's something about this guy. He just keeps coming back and back, and it's kind of uncanny. But you know, but it's not going to be easy. And I think his actual life may be in danger because there are quite a lot of things that are not clear, things that are hidden and not very easy. So he has Neptune in a square to the sun. That's a broad square. It's been exact the last couple of years. What else have we got going on here? Yeah, Mars is trining his sun. That's a little more favorable. Certainly gives him a lot of juice to keep going, but I don't like the square to the midheaven, and I absolutely don't like the fact that Mars is on the ascendant in opposition, on the descendant opposition to the ascendant and opposite his natal Mars. So yeah, again, looking for something positive. I'm finding it difficult to see something positive. Now, he has a much stronger opportunity to win this election, but I think his life is actually in danger. I think let's say his person is in danger. He might be in danger of being incarcerated, except that what I'm seeing, yeah, because also he's going to have Mars going through his 12th house of incarceration and hidden enemies. And that will be September, October, leading up to the US elections. And then Mars gets into the first house and turns around at 6 degrees. And that's in a trine to his Aries, in a trine to his Black Moon Lilith, which is not easy energy. And it's approaching a conjunction to Pluto. So pretty tricky stuff. Yeah, anyway, so just keep an eye out. You'll see that I think you will not be seeing Joe for most of the year. You'll probably be seeing more of Trump. And worst case scenario, he will not actually live to see the election, or will get elected and then get killed one way or another, something like that, I think. I hope I'm wrong. Let's have a look now at Ukraine. I don't know, what have I got? Oh, yeah, let's go quickly. We'll have a look at King Charles. Right, and it keeps messing up my chart, so I'm going to have to keep changing it. Sorry about that. I do want to keep that. There we go. All right, so we have King Charles now, who we know is not well. And he also has some really difficult aspects to his chart coming up. Keep in mind also, much like Trump, he's an eclipse baby. And so he will also be somebody who is deeply affected by the different eclipse cycles at any time, but especially these ones. And he's also going to be very personally affected by the Mars retrograde on his ascendant. He has the moon, squaring the nodes right now at this Aries ingress. So the equinox is, again, imagining for the year ahead. And that's not looking very positive for him. The moon is squaring Mercury, squaring the moon, squaring the nodes. And in opposition to Pluto, so he's got Pluto squaring the moon as well, which is bad news all around for, in general. It's not, it certainly doesn't mean the person is going to die, but when we add on a number of other things, it certainly doesn't bode well. He has had a Saturn opposition. That would have been, I think, where a lot of his trouble started, because that was in the 8th house to the 2nd house. And what was the other thing about Saturn? Saturn is squaring his Mars. It's a broad square. It's almost like 8.5 degrees or something like that. But still, that's a square to Mars, which is not good. Jupiter is being squared by Neptune. And Neptune is also squaring Uranus. So there's quite a lot of confusion. That's in the 8th house of sudden crises and secrets and hidden aspects, a house of intimacy, house of also occult and spiritual aspects. That would be a nice way of looking at this for him, and that he's having more personal spiritual growth, because he is anyway that way inclined. Uranus is opposing his sun this year. It started already last year, so he already has had this opposition, but it's coming back to oppose the sun. Neptune is also in a trine to Chiron, which is not helpful, because it means that there's a lot of confusion, even in terms of the illness or in terms of the psychological aspect. And Mars is squaring Chiron, which also is very uncomfortable, very challenging in terms of taking action. Not great. The Pluto square the moon is the worst part, I think, with the opposite. So the moon square moon is never comfortable, never good. It's squaring the nodes, and it's the moon represents our body, right? It represents the mind. It represents our health overall. We can see in the moon. So this is why I'm saying that's really not good. So anyway, there we are. So I think he's in for a very, very difficult year. Right. And Saturn will be squaring, even more powerfully squaring Mars when it stations retrograde at 19 degrees at the end of June. So that might be when more is known. And but I do think that that Mars, the Mars retrograding, stationing retrograde on the ascendant is going to be really challenging, really quite literally. It's in a square to Mercury and squaring the nodes. So this is not good. I think by December, there's probably going to be some pretty bad news. But maybe he will abdicate. That would be it. I think that would be the best outcome. I don't predict death. I wouldn't dare, and I wouldn't feel qualified to do it. But this is not a good chart for this year. It's going to be a really, really challenging year, one way or another. So hang on, sorry about that. Here I want to call in the other chart that I was using. I'm just looking for the ascendant and so on for the, yeah, because there we also have the descendant and ascendant of the right. I'm just looking at the descendant. The ascendant for this chart is in the 6th house of ill health, and it's squaring the midheaven as well. So I just wanted to see what that one was looking like. So again, all right, let's leave it at that, and we'll carry on. I would like to go. What have I done? Okay, we're going to go to Ukraine just to lighten the mood. Here we go, Ukraine. I'm going to take a different chart here. I want to have the Aries Equinox. I want to write that specifically there. Okay, there we go. So, right, so here's Ukraine. This is the chart for the country Ukraine. And we see that there is just immense pain and transformation here too. We've got the people, the moon representing the people, and it's directly connected to Chiron within 3 arc minutes of a degree. We've got Pluto in opposition to that Chiron and moon, and exactly conjoining Saturn to within 8 arc minutes of a degree. Unsurprisingly, Ukraine has been destroyed by this war, and it's infuriating because the warning signs were there by anyone who understood the situation and who wasn't being dogmatic about it. And to know that it could have been prevented is even more infuriating. But this is it. So here we have Pluto, Saturn. It will be there again next year. So as of December, January, February, Pluto comes back to this point into the early spring of next year. And that's the end of the story there. So this is the transformation of Ukraine as we have known it. Mars is in opposition to Venus. And this would be the destruction of allies or the relationship energy through trade. It's opposite Jupiter. It's opposite Mercury. We also have Saturn itself in a square to Pluto. And Uranus and Jupiter opposing Pluto from the 4th house. So, I mean, this is where we see the resistance, obviously, the Pluto in the 10th. There's a resistance to the Uranus, which has been changing the land, changing the country, what do you call that? The resources of the country, 4th house. From this resistance or this transformation, it's it's been what has taken up the better part of the last 3 years. So that first opposition to Pluto would have been from Uranus would have been in the summer of 2022. So it's spring of 2022, would have been the beginning of the war. I forgot, I should put that as a, so beginning of, I'm going to say April, May was when Uranus would have been in opposition. Starting, it would have been before that actually, but then exactly it was, that was the year we had the Uranus, North Node, and Mars all at 18 degrees of Taurus. Uranus, North Node, Mars opposite Pluto. That was the late spring of 20. That was the summer. It was building already, but then I think it was exact something like the 31st of July or something like that. But I mean, yeah, it breaks your heart. And so that's also Uranus is in a trine to the North Node, so something transforming, changing the destiny over the last 2.5, 2-ish years. Uranus is squaring the moon, and it will be exactly squaring the moon. It was last year as well, if I'm not mistaken. Have I got? Anyway, it does get up to 27 degrees, and that also puts it in a square to Mercury, Jupiter, and Venus later this year. But anyway, we're talking about right now. So if we just look at it from right now, it's already challenging enough. The Uranus squaring the moon is all you need to know in terms of the public as well, the people of Ukraine. Yeah. What else have we got here? Yeah, Neptune is opposite Mars this year. Neptune opposite Mars is a weakening of power, or not seeing clearly what actions to take. That's in the second house also of resources. Venus and Saturn are together in the second house of resources. Money is coming in or income coming in, and that's in a sextile. Venus is sextiling Uranus, so there's a big change there. There's some real instability there. Jupiter is trining Uranus, trining Neptune, and trining the North Node as well. That's a difficult one to read because that's all in the 12th house of hidden enemies, but also of loss. With Jupiter down in it almost feels like throwing good money after bad. You know, the Jupiter in the fourth, all those resources, all of the potential. Jupiter is ruling the 11th house of the future and the second house of money. So it feels kind of like throwing good money after bad. Yeah. Anyway, so that's that. So Ukraine is going to have, this is the end of Ukraine as we know it, 2024, and then 2025 will be the end of that. I should have done NATO as well. I'll do that in a separate thing, because NATO would absolutely show the same thing, because this Ukraine war has also been the end of NATO. So I want to have a look at Zelinsky. Zelinsky's another one who I think needs to, check under his car when he goes out the door. He has, this is a tough chart. This is, he's got the South Node on Pluto. A South Node on Pluto is a really interesting, many of you will have that. he's that generation. Obviously, anybody with South Node going through Libra now, if you're having your nodal return and you are that generation of this sort of 70s, if you're a 70s baby, you've got this Pluto in Libra as well. And so when the South Node is on Pluto, it's time to, you're outgrowing unhelpful behavior patterns, unhelpful patterns in ways of relating in general, and also confronting fear or any kind of power struggles and difficulties in relationship. And it's a very intense time that you don't need to be an astrologer to see that he's going through an intense time, obviously. But what's really interesting, it's in the book that I'm working on, part of the passage that I'm translating from this Anne-Marie Pelou, she writes for the ascendant Gemini with the sun in Aquarius. She writes the following. I just want you to, so this is not the only thing, but this is one of the things that she writes about it. Who did not keep their word. And these are key phrases like to think of. I submit to the pressure of my clan, who wants me dead, or who wants me to die. And the other thing is that the person, the native, has been unconsciously tasked or given up as a sacrificial offering to save the others, to save the clan. Now, I can't think of three more powerful things in terms of Zelinsky, who was elected on a peace platform, who had a peace deal, was at the table where there was a peace deal ready to be signed, and walked away from it. And that was 2 years ago. That was Boris Johnson who convinced him the first week of April of 2022. And that peace deal was there on the table. So anyway, food for thought. I will be fleshing out that book, because these are the kinds of things that I see in the natal chart, and then I really jump in with people and look deeply at what symbolically or metaphorically or actually is showing up in their lives. So in his case, it's actually showing up in his life. So any behavior, for example, South Node on Pluto, behavior that is not honest or helpful. Pluto is all about honesty and truth, being a truth sayer, getting to the truth of a situation, one's personal truth as well. So he has Pluto conjoining the sun at the time of this. He's got the moon on Mars and Pluto opposing his natal Mars within a degree and a quarter, a degree and 20 minutes or so. That's intense. And then he has Saturn opposing, Mars opposing Saturn. And Pluto is squaring Chiron. Chiron is trining Neptune and squaring Mercury and opposing Pluto. So Chiron, Mercury, North Node opposing Pluto. The sun is still in orb of a square of Jupiter. It's in a trine to Mars, and then Neptune is very powerfully squaring Jupiter. Maybe confusion around one's beliefs, confusion around what direction to take. Again, these are charts that are really hard to read, because they're not good, they're really difficult. And this is, we can see it playing out. It's not like this is a surprise or anything. It's really hard, but it's really looking like this is a very violent, very, very dangerous year for Volodymyr Zelinsky. So Jupiter opposing Uranus. He's cleared his Uranus opposition, but it's still in an orb. So again, very disruptive. Very challenging year for him. Just Pluto squaring Chiron alone, it's really, really hard. It's, when you go through Pluto square Chiron, your whole life is thrown up in the air. Everything's changing. All the factors of your life are transforming. And he has Chiron square Mars really, really strongly. So he already has issues in trying to deal with anger and assertion and authority. And then Pluto comes along and opposes that. So it's a tough situation. Right. I'm going to leave it at that. Again, not easy to read. I don't take pleasure in this. I'm just doing this because I find it extremely instructive in terms of the year ahead. I want to show you also Julian Assange. Now, here's one that I can actually say I think I can be positive about. And I'm really, really hoping that this is not just wishful thinking on my part. I do really hope that I'm seeing clearly what I'm seeing. But let's have a look. The ruler of the chart. Here we go again. I don't know why it keeps dropping my display points. I don't know what's going on with this chart. Anyway, here we go. So we have now an ascendant in Sagittarius. And so the ruler of the ascendant, of course, is Jupiter in his sixth house. And Jupiter at 14 degrees is squaring the nodes. And the North Node is in the Jupiter-ruled sign of Pisces, along with Venus, connected to Venus, which is also both of them sextiling Jupiter. So I'm hoping that this is a very good sign, that this brings some real benefit. Jupiter squaring the nodes can also be challenging in terms of one's faith, and losing faith, having doubts around one's faith. But the sixth house is the house of obstacles and legal issues and legal constraints and so on. And as I'm looking at this in a square to the North Node, where Saturn is also in a challenging house, has to be said. Saturn is in the fourth house, which is difficult. It's a challenging house that represents our psychology as well. So he won't for sure not be going through a happy time, but in a way that is supported somehow by this mutual reception with Venus. It's also Venus and Saturn. Venus exactly is trining the sun. This is absolutely wonderful. Saturn is trining the sun, which is supportive energy, very helpful, supportive energy. So Venus is also trining the moon. So another very helpful aspect as well. What I'm happy to see, let's say, I prefer the conjunction of Mars to Mars rather than the opposition, but it's also a separating conjunction. So he's had his new Mars cycle. He's now in a new Mars cycle of 2 years at the time of this ingress, and Mars is in a separating trine to Venus. So that's also quite constructive. It's helpful. Mars is exactly within a half a degree, very tightly squaring Jupiter. Mars squaring Jupiter that it rules as well. So that's very helpful. And Neptune is very, very tightly trining that same Jupiter as well. Also, we got Neptune is opposing Pluto, which can also be very helpful from a point of view of the power situation. If we think of that for him, on his behalf, it's about maybe his spiritual lens changing, let's say. And otherwise, from the point of view of the power structure that is hanging over him, that Neptune can be a softening factor, like the power, the pushback, like let's say, that he can get by having that Pluto in the 10th. People who have Pluto in angular houses often find themselves at one point or another in their lives really getting a lot of pushback, getting a lot of trouble. And with Neptune there in the fourth, there may be something that's softening that pushback. Pluto is trining Saturn, so it's a trine, which is very supportive. And again, I'm hoping I'm reading this well without simply going through it with wishful thinking, but it does look like there is this potential. Now, again, I have to say that he very likely is so far damaged through his health, his mental wellness, certainly the rest, his relationships and so on have been so damaged that he is going to struggle whether or not the court case works out in his favor. But at least if he is going to be a free man, that would be wonderful. I forgot to mention also the Uranus squaring the midheaven and squaring Mars. So that's also it's a separating square from the midheaven, and it's a developing square to Mars. So it's a first quarter square that it's growing. So that could be something also that changes the action or the situation in terms of his everyday experience or the legal situation, his health, and so on. Uranus squaring the midheaven certainly transforms an individual, and given that it's coming from the sixth house, change of a change of how he shows up to the world based on perhaps his health or perhaps his everyday situation, his everyday work situation. Again, these are not easy charts to read because this is a difficult year for so many reasons. But I just wanted to point them out. And then the last one is Israel. Hang on. And so Israel, where does Israel go? There it is. Israel is having quite a number of influences as well. In a very impactful way, we have Pluto opposing Israel's moon. The moon is returning at the time of the equinox. And this Mars is opposing Mars. So again, we're looking at this similar Mars opposition. For example, like Trump had, like Zelinsky had. This is not good. We don't like Mars opposite Mars if we're looking for peace. And so we're really seeing this as a struggle. We're seeing this ongoing war. I think it is going to last along most of this year. And the North Node has Jupiter conjoined. So from the eighth house, the house of turbulence and secrets and things that are hidden, things that are surprising, let's say. So as Jupiter is going over the North Node, this would have been the same place, for example, that Jupiter was in August and September. And now Jupiter is coming back. We have also Uranus, which is in a strong opposition to Chiron, and then building to a conjunction with the Sun. So again, we're looking at a situation where there's a really big change. We have Jupiter change in image for the country. We see the South Node in the first house of identity. The country's identity is changing. And what was the other thing? I just spotted something that I wanted to point out. Oh, yes, the square from Jupiter to Pluto. Israel has the look at all these malefics in the house of its future. So Jupiter has a square to Pluto and Saturn in the 11th house, and Mars itself is opposed by Mars. What's Pluto doing to anything else? It's enough that it's opposing the moon. That's already enough. Right, so that's something I wanted to point out. Of course, the sun is trining the moon. So from let's say from the house of enemies, from the house of others, from the house of partners in general, but this looks like it's also changing because we have now Mercury and Chiron conjunct the North Node, and that can suggest that there's now like these the partners themselves are reconsidering or reflecting, because that's where we're going to have the passage of Mercury back and forth 3 times over the descendant as it keeps getting reconsidered. So Mercury will be trining Jupiter when it gets to its maximum, and it will come back to this point when it is out of its shadow. So it's just entering the shadow phase now. That's in a trine to the Saturn and Pluto. And Chiron is trining Saturn as well, which is really uncomfortable, very challenging, requiring a lot of adjustment. Mercury will be on the descendant on the 25th of March, and then squaring the midheaven, actually between the eclipses, and then still conjoining the descendant, squaring the midheaven at the 8th of April. So I think there's going to be something really powerful in terms of relationships and agreements that are possible. But because Chiron is there as well, I'm not sure it's going, and it's because Mercury is going back and forth in retrograde. I'm not sure we're going to get very far with that, with any kind of negotiation or real lasting agreement, as there seems to be some lack of agreement in terms of partnerships, in terms of how to resolve this situation. That Mercury will be also in a sextile to Uranus in the 9th house, which is also agreements. Right. So that's Israel. So definitely something very, very personal, very specific to Israel. Also, I just noticed, of course, that we've got Mars too, which is trining the ascendant, and Mars is squaring the Sun and trining Uranus. So this is again, think of it for the year ahead. This is what the flavor of the year ahead is. I think this war will go on a very, very long time, but it will have a detrimental effect on the image of Israel. And then perhaps we'll go to Netanyahu. Do I have him? Oh, I guess I didn't save him. Where is it? I just had him. All right, let's see if I can find it here. Let me just check and see if I've got it. Oh, no, I don't. But his chart was also powerfully affected. I think as this is getting very, very long, I think I am going to leave it at that. What I remember from Netanyahu was that he's also having his nodal return, and he's having his Saturn opposition. So he, I suspect, is another one of these people who's going to have his ass handed to him in 2024. So, okay, we'll leave it at that. I think we've had enough. We need to move on to something more uplifting. I'm going to finish with Google because I think that's kind of just a kooky one. And this is the Google website. And the Google website, if you've been following their AI generator, and they've had this thing that is an image Gemini. I think it's called Gemini. It's an image generator. And this image generator has been spewing out all kinds of nonsense. And it's been devastating to not only the brand image of Google, but also to their stock value. As they're showing things like, African Nazis from the Second World War, like insane things. So anyway, all this to show you what is going on at Google and what you can expect to see through the year. So we have, again, we need to adjust this chart because for whatever reason, it's just not sticking with my usual displayed points. Here we go. So we have the sun is in a square to the ascendant, Neptune squaring to the ascendant at the time of this ingress, and that's Neptune squaring the ascendant is a confusion around one's image, one's corporate branding. Let's say its Neptune is very, very tightly sextiling natal Neptune. Here's another case of the Pluto squaring Chiron, a very, very powerful transit where there is a feeling of everything just falling apart. Everything's kind of just changing all in one go. And it's difficult to know sort of which pieces to pick up and which ones to leave behind. Pluto is also in a square to Venus, there's that the financial hit, and then Pluto is in a sextile to Pluto. So we see that there's a definite need to change. There's an image issue and a need to change. What else have we got here? Neptune is also broadly opposing the sun, and Saturn is in a sextile to Jupiter, so that's their saving grace, actually, although Jupiter is in their house of loss. And that rules their seventh house, and it rules their 10th house of image, corporate image, and 7th house of partnerships. And certainly that's where a lot of their loss has been. Uranus is sextiling the south node and trining the north node, trining the sun as well. So Google is in for quite a big change, big shift. The moon itself is also, because of that opposition to Pluto, the moon is also squaring Chiron and very exactly squaring Venus to within like 7 arc minutes of a degree. And the moon square Venus is very bad for the finances, very, very bad indeed. And so Mars is trining, Mars, which is ruling that Venus and Chiron conjunction, is trining the ascendant really powerfully, requiring change basically. And then as Mars goes soon after this ingress, Mars will go into the 10th house and cross the moon. And so I think we're going to be seeing quite a lot of things that Google will have to defend as it goes through the year 2024. Uranus is opposing Mars, and so there's going to be quite a lot of agitation. Mars is in their house of contracts and renegotiation, obligations, duties, work that they have to do. And Uranus is in the house of hidden enemies. So I'm sure there's also, it's the house of self-undoing as well. With Jupiter there, Jupiter ruling their 10th house, they may have got a little cocky. I think that's what's been happening with a lot of countries as well. Just the hubris is the thing that's taking them all out. So the North Node, Mercury, and Chiron on Saturn. So all of that on Saturn, and then it's conjunct Eris as well. There's this lack of integrity, lack of follow through, but Saturn in Aries is also real insecurity around image or insecurity around one's identity. And we see that with Google in terms of we're not seeing what they really are. I mean, they really are first and foremost, a security state tool. And we have been their product for 20 years or more. And so now the tables are turning somehow. It's a very interesting situation. Saturn, remember, is retrograding at 19 degrees, and that will be on their south node. So look at what's going on in the news around Google in June and July and see what's going on there, because something's going to come up, I'd say, around that time where there's going to be some kind of sacrificial lamb or some change in their image or some change in their stock valuation and so on. And yeah, okay, I'll leave it there. It's gone on for too long as it is. So I hope this was informative for you. I did that with the view of just kind of seeing what's coming up for the year, how the charts can work for the year ahead, how we can see how different influences in astrology can tell us something about the year ahead. And certainly as the Aries ingress is the astrological new year, it makes more sense than to look at it from the point of view of, say, the 1st of January. So I wish you all a wonderful astrological new year, far better than most of our sample charts. I do hope that your chart is being highlighted in a very constructive way, because there is quite a lot that is constructive, I think, in this chart, as you would have heard from the intro. Even if our warring friends are not finding the same joys. So good luck to all of you, and I'll see you in the next video.